So I'm going to talk about quick quotes, and this is a procedure that's been in place for quite some time in procurement. It's part of the regulations, but it's something that kind of operates a little bit underneath the radar, and that's why for us as suppliers, we're a small business, we have to bid as well. Knowing about some of this lower value work is really important. And more important, what do we need to do to make sure that we get invited to quote? Just from the buyer's point of view, at the moment, most procurement is regulated, so there's obviously certain rules, regulations, and importantly, for every public body now, they'll have what they call either a scheme of tender procedures, maybe standing orders, but it's effectively their internal rules as to how that public body operates its procurement, and that's where you can find the details of how each individual body is going to operate its quick quotes. But the main message is for tenders, it's divided into three categories. So either you're providing goods, products, or you're providing services, and that's the kind of first, what we'd call the first threshold. So anything, any contract that is valued under 50,000 can be procured through a quick quote. It's slightly different for works, and I've done a little bit of around the buyers here today, and there's a bit of variety in terms of what thresholds they use for works. And by works, that's largely construction, trades, civil engineering. Some local authorities, but not so many, can issue quick quotes up to a value of £2 million. The others that I've spoken to, most of them are tending towards 500,000, a few at £1 million. So depending on who you're targeting as a public sector buyer, particularly if it's works area that you're looking at, it's good to get in touch with them and find out what kind of threshold they're using. And the reason why the thresholds are very important, when a quick quote is procured, it's not published on Public Contract Scotland. So quite often we're asked, if we're advising companies, like, well, how do I get, where do I see the quick quotes? You know, where are they? You don't see a quick quote until you've been invited. And that's the absolutely critical part then. And we'll talk a little bit about that as we go through the presentation. But it's literally, it's an invitation system. So the buyer can decide effectively who they want to invite to submit a quick quote. So the critical part is that the quick quotes nowadays are administered on Public Contract Scotland. There's always been a kind of quoting facility in the public sector. So again, in that scheme of tenders, in the rules and regulations that each public body run by, you know, sometimes something up to £500, somebody can just go out and buy it. Within certain other categories, they would traditionally have invited maybe 3 quotes written, or even over the phone, or, you know, it's quite a kind of formal but not formal process. Quick quotes now is totally electronic. So that's the important part for us as suppliers. We need to be on Public Contract Scotland and have our profiles and everything fully ready to be visible. Very quickly, I'll have a quick show of hands. Is everybody registered on PCS? So I think almost everybody in the room. Very quickly, if you're not, it's free of charge. There's a simple registration button. You register as a supplier, and the forms are, it's a bit like online shopping. I usually say it's not particularly complicated. Fill them in. There is a question if you're a third sector, so social enterprise, maybe community interest company, a charity. You can tick that box, but it doesn't make any difference to whether you're visible or not. It's just something that the buyers are keen to know. First off, when you're registering, you'll fill in your company profile. Again, there's a couple of questions about the size of the business, this third sector one. And then, when you're registering, this will just come up automatically. But you have the company profile, but then the second one is your alert profile. And that's important because that's where you choose the categories to get the email alerts through. Not about quick quotes necessarily, but about the higher value tenders. However, the categories are important because the buyer might use these if they go on to PCS and say, right, who's in security, for example, they'll use the same categories in the alert profile to bring up a list of companies. We were contacted by Falkirk Council one day and said, look, we've sent you a quick quote that you haven't answered. We sent you a quick quote, but we couldn't find you. And we'd not chosen procurement as one of what they call the CPV codes. So we didn't come up in their list. So they thought that we actually hadn't bothered to fill in our profile. So the interesting thing about the alerts, in certain categories, it can be quite difficult. I don't know if some of you probably find this when you do get the notices through, that you either get a massive stuff or absolutely nothing. So they can be a little bit tricky. But when you go just that previous slide on the supplier interest area, when you click on the alert profile, you can check what categories you've chosen already. So it's a good idea tomorrow maybe to have a look at that. But you can also do a search. There's a tab for browsing, which kind of opens up the tree, but I find that a bit unwieldy. So I tend to use the search button and put in a few keywords and see what codes come up. And if it's one that I've missed, I'll click on that and add it to my list as well. So that's the alert profile. But the most important one is your supplier finder profile. So if you're registering, this will come up just automatically and ask you to fill it in. But if you've been using PCS for a while and you don't know whether you've got your profile or you want to change it, it's on this supplier's main area, which comes up when you log in. And it's down on the left-hand side here under the profiles. The supplier finder profile, once you've completed it, goes into a database. And effectively, that's available to the buyers to search. At the moment, if you register as a supplier, you can't find that. It's not accessible to us. I think that's a pity, because I've been bidding quite often in the past and be quite keen to find partners. So access to that would be quite nice. But maybe have a word with PCS people upstairs and see if there's any plans for that. So all you can do at the moment is log in and check your own supplier finder profile. Very important at the top is the status, publish and unpublish. I've got quite a few clients who've been sitting for quite some time with a really nice profile, but it's unpublished, i.e. totally invisible. So if anything, click publish and then start to fill in the rest of the detail. You get your basic contacts. You're asked as well about regions, and that tends to be regions that you can supply in. So in our case, we would probably work Scotland-wide, so we just click and select all of them. But it might be, and it is important for the buyers to know, if you can only provide a service in Ayrshire or South West or whatever, then only choose those. So that's the first part of the profile. The next part of the profile asks you to do two things. One is to complete a description of your company and what you offer. And the second one, which is also important, is to fill in 6 keywords or phrases. We are registered as buyers in PCS. I'm quite often looking through the database maybe just to check people's entries. And I cannot tell you how many are in with literally one line, 2 lines. So we provide flooring services, we build conversions, and literally nothing else. And that won't get you the quick quote. It's not enough for the buyer. Obviously, your website goes in, but you would risk really quite seriously not being selected. So I'll show you shortly what looks like a good entry. The main point is be aware that when the buyers are going through these, possibly they might find like 30, 40 companies. So you've got to have a profile that's kind of structured in sections. Unfortunately, at the moment, you can't do any formatting, but you can certainly divide it into paragraphs, maybe have sort of headings and so on. But a good way, I would say, for a profile is to start off pretty much with a summary, bullet points, largely you can put in, of what are your main services. Don't start with a big long history of the company necessarily. It's got to be punchy. I've seen quite a lot of profiles in PCS that are very salesy. We'll exceed your every dream, you know, we're the best in Britain, blah, 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 high quality, person-centred. You have to keep it kind of really quite neutral, I would say, but fill it full of facts. So your main services, any accreditations that you've got, particularly if it's, we're looking at a big retrofit tender at the moment. I don't know if any of the rest of you are looking at that, and it's awash with all sorts of mandatory certifications and things. So anything like that, get that listed quite high up. If you've been nominated or won any awards, it's really nice to mention. So that kind of lifts you a little bit above to say why you're better than all the other companies who offer the same. I would usually put in experience, particularly if you've worked with the public sector before. So name drop a few, doesn't have to be absolutely all of them. If you've not done public sector before, I would name drop some of the commercial work that you've done. Or if you're working in a kind of domestic setting, you would, you know, name the regions that you've worked in, maybe the number, the scale of work that you can do is really a good thing to put in your profile. I've seen, for example, people say, oh, we take on contracts anything between 10,000 and 200,000 value. So that's helpful for a buyer to know as well, if it's appropriate, if the contract's not going to be too big. And sort of key sales messages, but as I say, not too marketing, but you know, that's what makes us different. Repeat business is quite good. So that's a kind of reliability thing. You could say like half of our business comes from existing clients and so on. So this is probably about the length of a profile I would be aiming at. I think it's limited to, I can't quite actually remember. I think it's something like 4,000 characters, but it's a reasonable amount. But the keywords, again, are quite important. So it doesn't have to be single words. It can be phrases. Technically speaking, I think in the keyword box, you can actually fit in almost a whole sentence. But make sure, again, that the keywords are the ones that if somebody was searching for you, what's the term that they would use? So I've seen some keywords like great value for money. It's like absolutely useless. So keep it technically to what you're doing, particularly if it's like a specialist area, make sure that that's in your keywords as well. Okay, so this one, it talks about being the first social enterprise childcare service. So that to me as a buyer is interesting. It's got a description at the top of the different services. It's quite interesting as well. It talks a little bit here about their volunteering. And a bit like the presentation that we just had from the NHS, anything to do with community benefits and anything to do with sustainability. So environmental, what are you doing? Community benefits, what's your kind of track record? And again, if you can put numbers against those, that will really make your profile stand out. Okay, so when you're responding, I'll maybe sort of step back a bit actually. If you're invited to a quick quote, it's going to come into your mailbox and it's going to look a little bit like your alerts. So I've missed a few first time around because I didn't actually spot that it was a quick quote invitation. So that's a kind of first word of warning, if you like. But once you get that through, you click on that and it will take you through to the quick quote page and you'll be invited to accept or decline the invitation. If you accept it, then there'll be a trigger sent through to the buyer. They'll be able to see that, but also it opens up all the documents. And it's kind of similar to opening up a contract notice a little bit when you were searching on the main system. So when you accept it, it'll come into your interest list. And at that point, you would just treat it like a normal tender almost. Get the documents, review them. There's a Q&A. So if something's not clear, you can get back and ask questions. You can come in and out of the quote, so you don't need to return it straight away. The other thing is as well that the time scale for quotes it's not regulated. So you can get quotes where you're given literally just a few days to turn them around. Others you can get maybe a month or whatever, but it's absolutely up to the buyer to decide. So just be careful that you can see, obviously, the deadlines that we mentioned when you've clicked through. Okay, so you've got your quick quote. In theory, quick quotes are more straightforward than tenders, so you don't necessarily get as many documents to complete. I've been involved quite a lot of our work for training and consultancy comes through quick quotes, and we've had a few business gateway and council tenders that are quick quotes rather, that are just as bad as a tender, to be honest. But in theory, they should be a bit faster, maybe certainly fewer mandatory requirements, perhaps, on these as well. So the process, once you've completed it, you create your postbox respond. So it's just the same as doing a normal tender response on PCS. And you'll use your upload box to upload whatever, generally a technical response, usually obviously pricing as well. Quick quotes might be a price only as well. They might just ask you to sort of sign a few, like the form of tender, and then submit a price, and they don't need, how are you going to do it, the team and all of that as well. Okay, so the process, once you've got the quote in, is very straightforward. If I'm a buyer, and this is the part that as suppliers we don't see, if I've got a requirement, then I'll go into the buyer area of PCS, and I've got three choices. So as I mentioned earlier, I might search by product category, and I'll do that if I don't know necessarily who's in the market. I just want to see, digital marketing. It might be something quite specialist. And one areas where you're sort of testing out the market. And that's where it's important that you've got all the right categories set up on your profile as well. If I've got the supplier's details, so been to meet the buyer, they've got your card, they can then go up and just pick out your profile through your company name. So again, that's a bit more targeted. Probably the more usual one, though, is the third one, which is the supplier finder. And that's where they'll go into the supplier finder database and put in some keywords or a region, and they'll start to narrow down the people that they want to invite to quote. This is an example of what comes up in a search by category. You'll notice, unfortunately, as well, if you're Zodiac Transport, it's A to Z. So that's not necessarily good news if they've got 128 results or more. Okay, so this is the kind of view, if you like, that they get for the categories. It's a good question if you've still got people to see in the public bodies and ask them, what's their process for quick quotes? How do they go about searching? Do they use the keywords? Do they use the categories? The bottom line is they will want to come down to, and it's usually about 5 suppliers that would be invited to a quick quote. And they'll use then the full profile. So they've got the searching here. They might restrict it to regions or postcodes, something like that. But they'll end up with, this is obviously a result of 1, but you can end up with quite a really big list. When the profile's actually shown on the screen, all you get is a sort of teaser text at the top. So they'll see the first couple of lines of your profile. So that's why it's important to kind of start with a bit of a punch in terms of what you do, not, in 1826, da-di-da, formed the company sort of thing. Okay, but it's for the buyer, this is the problem that they have, and I think a number of people have referred to that, is that there are so many of us suppliers out there. They're desperate to find the good companies. So they're obviously keen. They'll use this as a tool because once they select you on the profile, it then drops into a quick quote function on PCS, and the buyers administer everything then through PCS. Just quickly on those 5 suppliers, there's quite a bit of movement starting now, particularly with local authorities, where they've got internal rules to say, and South Lanarkshire is a good example, when they put their 5 suppliers together, they have to, where they can, find 3 of the 5 from the South Lanarkshire region. And only then, if they can't source them locally, they'll go beyond. So for us as suppliers, if you're in South Lanarkshire, fantastic. If you're not good. And that's another question to make sure when you're engaging with the public bodies, what process they go through. Do they favour local SMEs? In quick quotes, they're allowed to do that. In the full regulated tenders, legally they're not. But quick quotes is very much a tool that can be used for local economic development. So the bottom line is, for all of us, we need to raise our visibility. It's fine to have your profile on PCS, so you obviously need that, but you can do a bit of searching around and some direct contacts with public sector bodies as well. As long as the tender is not published that you're going for, and the public bodies obviously have to take a step back, it's absolutely okay if you find the right contacts to get in touch. And the quick quotes obviously is a good excuse, I think, to say, here I am, particularly if you offer something a bit specialist. You say, this is what we do. We think we're quite unusual. We'd like to be considered for quick quotes. And that's a very good introduction, if you like. It's good to do your homework a bit first before you do that. So find out if there's any frameworks, maybe or tenders already running, contracts running in your area. But if there's not, it could well be that it's something that's done through quick quotes. So keep your profile up to date. Be aware, and I've seen this happens quite often, particularly if you're a slightly larger organisation, there might be loads of people in the company who've individually registered and they've all start putting up supplier finder profiles. So when the buyer comes to put out a piece of work, it's, I don't know, like training or something like that, they'll say, oh, well, here's Gillian Joy Training Limited. Oh, there's 6 entries. And they'll just kind of have to randomly say, well, which one do we send it to? But it could well be someone who's registered and gone on holiday. Worse still, somebody who's left the company. So the quick quote goes to an email that's just kind of there, but nobody answering. So I would always recommend that you try and use a kind of generic info at, tenders at, and that comes to at least, say, 2 people. It's also important when you're doing your searching, if you're away on holiday and the tender alerts come through, it could well be that that's the time when the very important tender comes out. So if you're able to do that kind of alias, that's important. If you use search for buyer or the contracts register on PCS, it's a good way to start doing a bit of an audit through particular public bodies. The contracts register will tell you, it's a bit like a big Excel spreadsheet, it'll tell you what contracts are in place already. And within that, you might find some of the quick quotes work. There is a voluntary process for a quick quote award to be published in PCS. So some of you might have seen them coming through, but a little bit after the event. So it tells you that a quick quote process has taken place, but obviously you don't see the call for quotes process. It's only afterwards that you see it's gone through. But quite a lot of the contracts notices on PCS will have a named person at the top. The contracts register, if you search for that, almost definitely does. And I prefer that because the contracts register, if you pick up a contract and go down the list of the details, there's usually an email at the bottom, and it tends to be the person who actually manages that contract. So rather than procurement at or the kind of generic contacts. So it's a good job for, if you get anybody in, like a student placement, I'd be setting them off on PCS and getting them to harvest some of these names associated with the contracts in the areas that you're interested in. And, of course, meet the buyer events. We've got this one today. But through the Supplier Development Programme, which you're all registered for, make sure you keep an eye out for regional events. I've been to some run by the Tier 1 contractors. There was a big Balfour Beatty one a few months ago for Falkirk. And again, fantastic opportunities to get face-to-face and get your kind of request to be considered for quick quotes out again. Can I just ask quickly, anyone that's been invited for a quick quote so far? Yeah, a few, good. Hopefully one as well. Fantastic. I don't know if there's any questions come through the app.
Hi, thank you. When you showed a screenshot there of where you've been invited to submit a quote, and when you accept that, it takes you through into a page and you can see the title of the document. Do you have to fill that document in by opening it up there and then and fill it in online? Because if that's the case, what I've done, and I'm just checking because I've actually downloaded the document and completed it offline so that I could then upload the completed document as part of the, because it gives you an opportunity to add other documents. Would that be wrong to do that? Will I need to go back and fill that in online from the offline document, or can I just submit it that way?
No, that just what you've done is exactly the process. So when you get the quote, you'll go into the kind of work area, and yes, you need to download the documents, work offline to complete them, and then upload them. So that's absolutely fine. There is another system called PCS Tender, and it's much more where you fill things in directly. But the quick quotes, almost 100% is through PCS. So yes, you're fine. It'll have gone
Thank
through.
you.
Is it still relevant to the sole trader as well? So if I'm trading as a sole trader, I can still go on, I'm very new to it. I can still go on and register myself on the PCS website, and that's okay, and that's not going to...
Yeah, absolutely. And it's quite, there are a number of tenders, maybe some of the larger tenders where you're required to be a limited company, but to be honest, I'm trying to think, in the last 14 years, I can only think maybe of one or two occasions where they've required you to be a limited company.
With it being invitation only, is there a danger that the competition elements is in jeopardy if those doing the procurement focus on preferred suppliers?
Yes, absolutely. So we're just saying if it's invitation only, it could be open to the buyer just giving the same people the quotes all the time, which is how the old systems, I guess, kind of worked, like approved lists that nobody knew quite how to get onto. What will happen in public bodies is that they will be audited. So there is an overview process, and they will have internal rules like best practice. I've heard people say, so obviously there's this quite new thing coming along where maybe 2 or 3 have to be within the local authority area. They usually say that we would try someone that we've worked with already, who's done a good job. We might go for people who were second or third in the tender in the past, but quite often as well they'll say what they call a wild card. Okay. And that's someone that we've never worked with, they're new to the scene. So for example, the gentleman previously, if you're a sort of new start, in theory, there is still a chance. But obviously for the quotes, if they do tend to limit it maybe to sort of 5, it can be quite difficult, obviously, to be one of those 5. But there's certainly at some point they would be audited if they routinely only put the quote out to certain people.
Okay, so we've had a few questions through from the app, and we'll maybe just stick to one that's not been covered so far, I don't think. Gill, how do I know if a quick quote is worth pursuing for my business?
Yeah, I think you probably would need to, obviously, if you are invited to quote, the first thing you do is open up the documents, check. Obviously, sometimes you get given a budget, so this is the other difficulty with quotes. You'll know by definition if it's goods and services, the value is less than 50,000. That 50,000, by the way, could be for a 2 or 3 year contract of 10,000 a year, so it's not necessarily that it's 50,000 a year. But the thing is, yeah, just to get the documents, check that it's doable. I've seen some people being asked to quote and given a budget and they've just said, well, we can't do it for that price. If you decline the quick quote, you'll be asked for a reason. And it's just for information. It shouldn't stop you from being invited to quote again.
The threshold there of 50,000 for goods and services, is that likely to change? Who sets that limit? And, it kind of links in with the competition question. Because You know, so is it an arbitrary figure? Is it, you know, is it nationally decided so that, you know, that there isn't too much, you know, reduction of competition, and therefore you have to go to the full tendering process? You know, because you said that with construction, there is a different threshold.
Exactly, yeah. So two things. It is decided centrally, so these have been agreed, certainly Scotland-wide, but UK-wide there'll be similar thresholds. But a public body can decide not to put something through quick quotes. I know certainly Fife Council used to put a lot of their like trades work out as kind of small, almost like single jobs, but they were done as a fully published tender. So the public body has the choice whether to go down the quick quotes route or not. And I think I spoke to somebody upstairs this morning actually, and they said if we are worried but that we've not kind of got a restricted pool, if you like, and we want to open it up, we would definitely publish, and that would be their choice. It might be increased is another thing, certainly. I think the limit on the works one used to be about 500,000, and it's been increased to 2 million, but only in the last few years, I think. So it started off at a level that probably wasn't maybe high enough, but a £2 million contract's big, I think, even though that might be over 4 years. It brings quite a lot of work under the radar a little bit, which could be a bit concerning for competition.
Excellent. So if that's all the audience questions, I think I'll just ask you to give Gill a round of applause and we'll wrap up.